to cover today, so I'm going to dive right into this. And I will just add that all going well, by this time next year, the book that I'm doing with Max van Balgooy, on interpreting Christmas at historic sites and museums should be out. So with that, I'm going to jump into this. Just bear with me while I share my screen and get this going. Please do type in questions, and here we go. Just minimize that, this, and we'll get going. Great. All right. Well, the celebration of Christmas today is for many the most important holiday of the year. The history of Christmas in America is a rich tapestry of traditions shaped by a diverse array of religious, cultural, and historical factors that evolved over centuries. Now, Christmas traditions and celebrations varied by regions here in America and by cultural background. And here you can see one of those traditions. This was in New Mexico, and the Christmas traditions in New Mexico were influenced by Spanish, Native American, Mexican, and Anglo-American traditions. El Santiago de Chimaya, that I have visited, was built in 1813. Now, the southern colonies were a bit different. In New Orleans, one of the traditions, we write about this in our book, is about the Reveillon. And it was a large meal that was served after midnight mass, a Catholic tradition, but particularly strong among the French. Now, the southern colonies, as I mentioned, were more traditionally English. The Europeans, the original settlers to New England, the Puritans, avoided the celebration of Christmas for two main reasons. There was no biblical sanction for it, and they found the Church of England and English Christmas festivities excessive. And indeed, as in this Thomas Rowland illustration, you can see they were rowdy. They included exchanging gifts for goodwill, dancing, songs, feasting, begging, and lots of drinking. Now, I want to really focus in on just setting the stage for this, the rest of this talk about the Christmas traditions developed slowly over time in America. And the focus of this lecture is how the female abolitionists have played a major role in the development of Christmas. And this is not particularly well known. But there were other influences too. The main way people got their information about any news of the day or current trends was in periodicals, the newspapers of the day. I'm focusing in on the period 1830s to 1850s. And at this time, the Christmas that we know today was only beginning. Many of the things that we think of today as traditional were just really in their infancy. People learned about the tradition and customs through the magazines of the day. And some of you might recognize this couple. And if you're guessing that that's Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, you're right. On the left, it was published in the London Evening News in 1848, and with some slight changes, appears in Godey's Lady's Book in America in December 1850. So this is how people are first starting to learn about trees, and we'll talk more about that. And St. Nicholas was in the process, and here you see St. Nicholas in this broadside from the New York Historical Society that made St. Nicholas their patron saint. And thanks to Washington Irving in New York and the Knickerbockers, who were the descendants of the Dutch, St. Nicholas would start to morph and become Santa Claus. But it took a long time for the Santa Claus. Look at this one. He does not look like the Santa Claus that we're used to seeing. become the Santa Claus that we would know. He would evolve into this Thomas Nast's famous 1863 cartoon. So the point is, these traditions are changing and morphing mainly in the 19th century. There were no Christmas cards in America until the 1850s, and they did not gain in popularity till Louis Prang of Boston popularized this in the 1860s. And I want you to look at them. It's not the Christmas cards that we're used to seeing today. The imagery had not been set. These were not seasonal, as you can see. There was no such thing as wrapping paper until the very end of the 19th century. Christmas presents were unwrapped, and Santa brought them, as you can see, in his basket, unwrapped. Now, as I said at the beginning, female abolitionists played a role, in a major role. And who were these women? Mainly, but by no means always, from the upper and middle class families. And that was both Black and white. And you'll meet some of these women as we go through tonight's talk. Now, by 1830, the Christmas season was becoming a popular time for fundraising fairs, and that was mainly done by churches. I'm showing you a broadside for an anti-slavery society. And why were they doing this? Well, to finance the abolitionist cause. Abolitionist women organized Christmas bazaars that sold donated gifts, many of them made by hand, that trumpeted anti-slavery messages to promote emancipation. Now, we're in the season right now, these Christmas fairs. This is actually one of the oldest traditions we have in all of America, and that's the Christmas fair. I live in the smallest town in Massachusetts, Nahant, and this was our Christmas fair. It happened last weekend. Charity fairs or bazaars to raise money for a variety of causes sprang up on both sides of the Atlantic in the 1820s and 30s. Now, at this time, to understand how radical this was for women to even be doing the church fairs, let's talk about the role of women in early 19th century society. The cult of domesticity was a philosophy that sought to define gender roles in the 19th century. The cult held that a woman's place was in the home, where her superior virtue was to create a strong, morally uplifting environment for her children and husband. A man's place was in the more corrupting and violent world of work and public affairs. Women were equated with virtue and purity. And middle and upper class women devoted time to helping charities that sought to alleviate the plight of the poor. Good causes that a woman might participate in were Bible societies and educational institutes, etc., domestic duties. Now, the idea that women might engage in public speaking and commerce went against the domestic sphere and represented a challenge to accepted norms, like this woman. In 1829, British reformer Frances Wright toured the United States and lectured against slavery. That same year, an artist published this cartoon making fun of Wright. It depicts Wright standing near a table and giving a lecture, but she has the head of a goose. The title says Wright deserved, quote, to be hissed. According to this artist and many others, women should not speak in public, and the public should not care to hear what she has to say. Now, the early 19th century and continuing throughout saw a shift as women in the lower and middle classes and working classes, particularly in the urban Northeast, entered the workplace. That meant supplementing family income by working either in industrial mills as domestic servants or vending on city streets, or later becoming teachers. Now, abolitionism dates of the 17th century in America. Abolitionism as a political movement is usually dated to January 1, And the first issue of the Liberator, you see the masthead here, which was in existence from 1831 to 1865. This was the most widely circulated anti-slavery newspaper during the antebellum period and throughout the Civil War. It was published and edited in Boston by William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison was a leading white abolitionist and founder of the influential American Anti-Slavery Society. Over the decades of its publication, the Liberator denounced all people and acts that would prolong slavery, including the United States. Just to mention, he was originally from Newport. He spent some time working in Lynn. He and the other fellow abolitionists were out on the stoop, so to speak. And this is Wendell Phillips speaking in Boston Commons. So this is one way, besides the newspapers, that they're getting the word out. Now, there were many abolitionist societies created through the United States to stop slavery. I'm showing you some ads in the Liberator from some local, and we'll see some other parts of the country in just a minute. Between the years 1825 and 1833, there were 73 active female associations in the United States. And I want to talk about one of the most successful and long-lived societies, and that was the Salem, the Female Anti-Slavery Society of Salem, founded in 1832. It was the first all-female anti-slavery organization established in the U.S. And this groundbreaking group was made up of, at that time, entirely of African-American women. It would eventually integrate. Now, they addressed a variety of issues in addition to abolitionism, and that was, that included support for free Blacks, assisting newly freed or runaway slaves, and it opposed segregation and discrimination. And what you're looking at are the record books that exists and lectures that they held. And these are in the Peabody Essex Museum of Salem. Salem women contributed to other fairs. They also held several fairs offering goods made by Black children and young people. Now, just to show you that this was a movement across a good part of this country. On the right, you can see Lucretia Mott, who was involved and one of the founders of the Philadelphia Anti-Slavery Society. They also sponsored fairs. Their goal was to raise money for Frederick Douglass, the former slave, and abolitionists. And here we show you a page from their record book. This was also one of the few racially integrated societies. And that was rare even among the women's societies I mentioned. These were two of the founders, a mother and daughter, and this included Sarah Douglass on the right and her mother on the left. They were Quakers, friends. Quakers were generally opposed to slavery. The mother and daughter met and developed a close relationship with Lucretia Mott. I just showed you the Grimke sisters, Angelica and Sarah. I'll talk more about them later, to create the Philadelphia Female Anti-Slavery Societies, because they were not permitted to become members of the Anti-Slavery Society in Philadelphia because they were women. All kinds of prejudice. Closer to where I am living these days, that was the Lynn Female Anti-Slavery Society. They also were unwelcome at men's anti-slavery meetings, and they created their own organization in 1835. As many as 180 women belonged to this group. And here you see one of the certificates for joining that society. Now, another way women were active in abolition abolitionism was through petitioning. Lacking the right to vote at national elections, women sought to influence Congress through their constitutional right to petition. Congress received hundreds of thousands of petitions from women that addressed all aspects of the anti-slavery issue, including the slave trade, the Kansas Tractor Act, and so on and so on. The petition drives represented women's most important grassroots work for abolitionism in the 1830s. And an important part of this was the sewing circles. Most of the female abolitionists formed these sewing circles. Typically, one member of the group would read anti-slavery literature while the others sewed and made products for sale at the fairs. And here's a banner for what we call a broadside, it's another word for a poster, showing you the Sewing Circle Society from Weymouth. Weymouth, you'll see lots. It was a very active society. This is an example of one of the things that they made at those societies, a quilt. I'm going to talk more about that as we go on. One of the leading female abolitionists was Mary Chapman, an author, editor, and ardent abolitionist born in Weymouth. In 1833, she helped found the Boston Female Anti-Slavery Society, which was both Black and white, had both Black and white members. And the anti-slavery fair was her invention. In 1834, their sisters and friends, notably Elizabeth Southwick, Louisa Loring, and Lydia Marie Child, the Female Society organized the first of many anti-slavery fairs to help raise money for the cause. Now, the first year, the fair was, there was a great fear of vandalism. It was so strong, the organizers could not find a public space to hold the fair. People simply did not want them because of this fear. Town leaders barred the women from renting any of the city's hall. They were forced to hold the bazaar at the New England Anti-Slavery Society office on Washington Street. And if you know Boston, this is down by the old State House in Boston. And fundraising fairs became a staple of the abolitionist movement and the primary focus of female anti-slavery society activity. Women from across the Northeast, the Mid-Atlantic, as far away as DC, contributed goods. And I show you this ad that shows just some of the local organizations in different towns that are giving articles, and you can see the value of what they were worth. The first fair that Chapman held was a huge success and raised over $300. Now, in today's currency, that would be over $10,000. And this is an ad that appeared in the Liberator in 1840. It's signed by Maria Chapman. And in this, she says, it has been decided upon consultation and advice with the friends of the cause in various parts of the state to hold the fair during Christmas week and to spare no exertions to make it a pleasant and profitable occasion to the good old cause, which every year's effort makes dearer and dearer. So this was to pound the message of abolitionism, but also about making profit. And we'll talk more about that. Now, women developed many skills as they did these fairs. They organized them. Remember, this was moving out of the sphere that the spheres they were allowed to work in. Yes, this was a charity, but it was a very controversial charity. But women supported each other. Here, the Boston women offer support to Lynn. So this is Lydia Marie Child in Boston supporting the Lynn Anti-Slavery Fair. Basically, the money is all going to go to the same organization. Now, generally, the fairs were held at Christmas time, but not just, as you can see from this Weymouth anti-slavery fair. And there were other anti-slavery events like picnics and so on that happened. And this is just to show you some of the, a few broadsides, again, posters, ads for fairs, Mechanics Hall being in Worcester, this one in Boston. What's note here, it really drives home that there was an opportunity to purchase articles of use and beauty. Among these are the elegant donations of friends in France, Switzerland, and Great Britain. Chapman was key in connecting these networks across not only the country, but Europe. And for a for a number of years, she actually, while managing these fairs, was living in England and making these connections. I just show you, and you can read this poem on your own. And it talks about, again, the money that's given, their chains will be riven. In Boston, the fairs were held in a variety of locations. And as they grew in popularity, they needed to find new homes. These were then, at this point, were considered less volatile, and they were able to expand into larger halls, as you can see here, Faneuil Hall being one. Now, the money went mainly to fund Garrison's American Anti-Slavery Society from this fair. I mentioned other fairs in other parts of the country funded Frederick Douglass. These are just a couple of tickets to show you. These are in the Boston Public Library for the fair, or as they often called it, the bazaar. Now, it was at a local fair or Sunday school that in the first half of the 19th century that most people encountered their Christmas tree. And here you can see a Christmas tree. On the right, this was actually from a church fair. Here's a ticket for a church festival. And here you can see advertisements. This was for the Sabbath school. This is in Middlebury, but they make a big deal of saying you can see a Christmas tree. And you could see a Christmas tree. This was a big deal for people to see it. And here, if you look down it towards the end, it says the Christmas tree. These were big. At the 1834 fair, the decoration included an evergreen shrub. Stephen Nissenbaum, the historian who wrote The Battle for Christmas, said, if any of the articles for sale were actually attached to the shrub or placed around it, then it would, quote, have the honor of being the first public tree in America. So I want to talk a little bit about Christmas trees to put this in perspective. This is the earliest image we have in America of a Christmas tree. It's a sketch that was done in the Pennsylvania countryside, either 1812 or 1819, by John Lewis Krimmel, a German painter who had emigrated to Philadelphia. So Christmas trees, although being promoted as an ancient, were actually quite new. This is the very first printed image of a Christmas tree, and it's the front piece to The Stranger's Gift, a gift book. You'll hear more about those. This was published in 1836, and it was written by a German immigrant, Hermann Bochum. So Germans had a lot to do with bringing this tradition to America. And these early trees were decorated with handmade items. Presents were tied to the tree, the larger ones below it. Notice they were not wrapped. Now, several of the Boston fairs offered children with the admittance fee to take one ornament or gift from the tree. Now, the earliest ornaments, as I mentioned, were handmade. And this is in Godey's Ladies book, where there was an article showing you how you at home could make these cornucopia or bags, articles for the Christmas tree. You might also buy candle holders, which came in came in different varieties and shapes that you could use on your tree. And it wasn't until later in the 19th century, the last quarter, that floor to ceiling trees become popular. This is one that is in the home of the Upton family in Salem, Massachusetts. The house they lived in was a private home, their home. We know it as the House of Seven Gables in Salem, Massachusetts. Now, the Christmas tree in this ad I showed you before was called a new attraction, a brilliant spectacle. And the Liberator reported the tree, quote, was completely loaded with Christmas gifts, brilliant with sparkling cones and gilded butterflies, and every branch bristling with wax candles. Now, the night the tree was unveiled, the crowds were so great that many could not physically get into the halls. That was all reported in the newspapers. Now, the female abolitionists played a key role in the use of greenery. Greenery was first used in chapels, and I found accounts going back to the very end of the 18th century. Here you're looking at a later picture of King's Chapel in Boston from 1841, and you can see all the swags of greenery there. And this is even later from Godey's Ladies book, 1879. Frances Drake of Leominster, Mass. Wrote in 1843, she sent greens in for decorating at the Boston Fair, along with hand-sewn goods to be sold. So decorating these fairs were another way of promoting the use of greenery, and that would then translate into greenery in houses, as you can see here. Now, abolitionists helped to establish the practice of Christmas shopping and a Christmas shopping season. This, according to Eric Foner. And my research has shown that the commercialization of the holiday, we always talk about that, was there from the very beginning. Women's groups were, in a sense, cashing in on the growing commercialization of Christmas. And these are ads from newspapers that I've researched. The one on the top is actually 1806. The one below was from the Boston was from Boston in 1839. But the point is, commercialization of Christmas was there from the beginning, and the female abolitionists noted this and were right there as part of it, promoting gift giving. And this just shows you the variety of things that people could get at the holiday season. Now, this is from the Liberator in 1836, and it wrote, "An opportunity will thus be afforded, not only to those who wish to contribute to the cause of the slave, but all who wish to procure a variety of Christmas and New Year's presents. The commercial nature of the fairs placed women squarely in the bustling world of buying, selling, and consuming, and the commercialization of the holiday." Here's a floor plan of the 1839 anti-slavery fair with booths hosted by sister organizations from across Massachusetts. And in this, it also lists how much money each of those societies raised. Some of the societies, I know it's a little hard to read, I'll just mention a few: Fall River, Dedham, New Bedford, Brookline, Lynn, Andover. And here you can see these, another from 1840, showing the different in different organizations. And that was even broader, including towns from Rhode Island, Warwick, Kingston, so on and so on. An article written by Maria Chapman for The Liberator describes the fair at length. She writes, an interesting assemblage is gathered. The anti-slavery women of Massachusetts, all parts of their beloved Commonwealth, superintend the sale of the various articles of taste, ingenuity, and utility, which they have for months been busied in preparing for this occasion. Never was there a finer displays of money's worth, whether the purchaser be in search of the useful or the beautiful. They also had a refreshments table. You can see what one in Ohio had. The 1842 fair in Philadelphia had a poultry stall, including a fine porker. It included butter, cheese, chestnuts, and shell barks, and so on. So food was also a big part. Now, I want to show you some of the goods that were actually sold at these fairs, and I want you to look at them carefully because you will note they all, for the most part, had messages. Melissa Amadin was writing to the Lowell Female Anti-Slavery Society in 1835, and she wrote, these handkerchiefs, and that's what you're looking at, were produced in the hope, quote, that the sad picture of human suffering, those too poorly portrayed, the enslaved, may kindle in the breast of many a free-born happy child a glow of heartfelt sympathy and cause the tears to flow and the infant offering to arise to heaven in behalf of those downtrodden. And here's an example of a quilt. I showed you one before. I'll show you another. This quilt was made in 1842 by Quaker women of Clinton County, Ohio, and Wayne County, Indiana. Now, Abby Kelly Foster was an American abolitionist and social reformer, active from the 1830s to the 1840s. She became a fundraiser, lecturer, and committee organizer for the American Anti-Slavery Society. She also was for a time in Lynn. This is a quilt that she made that is actually in the Worcester Historical Society. And this quilt had an inscription which you can read on your own in it. Remember the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Fair. Now, another woman I've mentioned before was Lydia Marie Child, one of the founders of the Boston Female Anti-Society and the Anti-Slavery Fair. She was an author, poet, and abolitionist. And this quilt I showed you previously is one in the collection of the organization I work for, Historic New England. And it was actually described in The Liberator, where they talk about a patchwork and small stars and a transcription of the poem in the center. And here's the poem. It says, Mother, when around you your child, you clasp your arms in love. And when with grateful joy you raise your eyes to God above, think of the Negro mother when her child is torn away. Soul for a little, slave, oh then, for that poor mother pray. This is actually a rare survival in the collection. A lot of goods, it's hard to tell that they were actually made for the fairs unless they have these slogans. They also sold letterhead, and you can see a very common image of the kneeling slave with the chain. This is actually was used by Angelina Emily Grinke Weld. She was an American abolitionist, political activist, women's right advocate, and supporter of the women's suffragette movement. And this will all come back at the end. She and her sister, Sarah Moore Grimke, are the only white Southern women who became abolitionists. This is in the collection of the Boston Public Library. And here she's actually writing to Queen Victoria uh, in hopes that abolitionism will take hold and be abolished in England, which, as you probably know, did happen before. These items were also sold at the fair. I show you a whole sheet, but also you can see these were stickers, basically, wafers that could be detached and used to seal or um, close envelopes. And one says, "Man stealers, the worst of thieves." I hope you can read those. Now, these were the fairs also had banners. These are rare survivals in the Andover Historical Society, and they were done by the Smiths and Doves Company, who were active abolitionists in Andover and appear frequently as being mentioned in The Liberator. So this was a banner, and we have descriptions of banners. Here's another one actually at the fairs. Although later, this is a later example, potholders were frequent items for sale. And I mentioned previously that these fairs started to attract um, international goods. Now, the earlier goods were generally all handmade, and then that is going to change over time. There would still be handmade goods. But this is a list from the Ladies Anti-Slavery Society of Perth in Scotland to Maria Chapman in November 1850 of the goods that they are sending over, which include children's clothing, I know it's read, and so on. These goods that I'm showing you were essentially propaganda like this, and captured the abolitionist beliefs. This is an example of a typical item you could find at a fair called a reticule. It's really a small handbag, usually closed with a drawstring and decorated with embroidery or beading. I have a few examples, but you see an enslaved man. Often they came with poems, like I showed you before. Here's some other examples. Um, Often, these would be used to show your beliefs. If you're walking out on the street and carrying one, you're basically showing what you believe in and using that as propaganda. This is from the Lynn Museum's collection. Again, another rare item that survives. This is a pin cushion. And you can see the symbolism is used over and over again. And this was another pin cushion, Remember the Slave, also in the Lynn Museum's collection. Samplers were also made, this one from the 1829 to 1840 in the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Again, you see the same symbolism. And here, this is in the collection of Historic New England. It's part of a set that belonged to James Buffum, a Quaker from Lynn. In the early 1840s, he befriended Frederick Douglass when Douglass published his autobiography in Lynn, and he revealed his location. And in doing so, he risked his freedom. Douglass was sent to Britain with Buffum. And later, Douglass's freedom would be purchased. Now, that was very controversial. Family tradition says that this set was bought at one of Boston's anti-slavery fairs. Here's another bag, and it belonged to a prominent Lynn family, the Breeds. And in French, it says, "Remember the slave." Now, I've showed you this image a number of times. I should have really explained it. This was modeled by William Hackwood for Josiah Wedgwood, China maker, in 1787. The medallion incorporates a number of design and literary sources, and it was inspired by the seal of the Society of the Abolition of the Slave Trade in England. So this would get used over and over. This is another good. This is a fancy good. Copies of Wedgwood's anti-slave medallion circulated in many different media, as evidenced by this cologne bottle, which was likely produced around 1833. An ad I found said that in one of the Boston bazaars, you could find cologne bottles of Old Sev, scented oil, and Paris soaps. Maybe that bottles of cologne was in a glass like this that you see. Now, I mentioned books. Books were on the cutting, I mentioned gift books specifically, and they were on the cutting edge of a commercial Christmas. And they became ubiquitous. And again, female abolitionists jumped on this bandwagon, and Maria Weston Chapman produced the Liberty Bell as an annual abolitionist gift book, she edited and published it. And she brought all the leading lights to write poems, prose, and essays. And that included people like Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, Lucretia Mott, William Lloyd Garrison, Wendell Phillips, and so on and so on. And here you see this was sold for years there. They weren't the only society. The Philadelphia Society also published an anthology of literature, a gift book sold at their fair. And I threw this in here because this was done for I didn't mention again, the Rochester Anti-Slavery Society. And this book includes the only published fiction of that gentleman you see there, and we mentioned before, Frederick Douglass. Now, the abolitionist movement was about helping those less fortunate. And that was something that was permeating society. And you can see that in this contrasting the poor man's to the rich man's Christmas. Of course, that was popularized by Charles Dickens. This was also a time when how children were being viewed was changing. Christmas was becoming a family-centered event, as you can see here. And abolitionists, the female abolitionists, played a role in this too, helping to make family center to the holiday and as a gift-giving time of the year. This is an engraving by Winslow Homer. It was during this period that attitudes towards childhood changed and now became a special time. And the central purpose of the family was to provide not only for the children's instruction, but for their happiness. So, two aspects of the late Victorian holiday: remembrance of the poor and those less fortunate, and how can you get less fortunate than being enslaved? An increasingly elaborate display and consumption existed side by side, as you can see here. Now, the fairs also sold goods specifically for children. And this mentions children and children's goods and goods sent by the London and Glasgow Female Anti-Slavery Society clothing, household objects, and so on. At this time, children were getting things that you might expect. Dolls, which you can see here. This was received by a young woman in Lynn in the early 1860s. Edith Longfellow of the Longfellows in Cambridge received this on the right, the jumping jack from in 1853. But at the abolitionist bazaars, many items were sold to instruct children. And here is Uncle Tom's Cabin card game, and it was published in Providence, Rhode Island. And here, players are dealt cards and decide which family they would like to complete. What they're trying to do is keep the families intact so that they're not sold off to the slave holder Legree. There were also books that were published. The Anti-Slavery Society in Philadelphia published a reader in 1846. And here you can see a few pages I wanted to show you. These were generally to instruct children at home. And you can read these yourself. Not in the classroom, but people's homes. So what happened to the bazaar? By the 1850s, these fairs were attracting thousands and raised over $5,000 annually, according to historian Foner. In 1858, on her own, Maria Chapman decided to cancel the annual bazaar in favor of an annual subscription service. She said, like an old broom, it ought to be replaced. I have invented an instrument to replace it, the 25th annual anti-slavery subscription festival. And here we have some of the ads for that. And this, as it turned out, was a success and raised over $22,200, more than the final bazaar. Now, this replaced the bazaar. She said that the fair had become passe. She argued the anniversary, an exclusive invitation-only soiree, this one held at the Music Hall in Boston, which included food and speeches, was more a courant and would raise more funds than the bazaar, and it actually did. And here you see that fairs were just one aspect. You know, the anti-slavery societies also held meetings and lectures, and women continued to be active in the anti-slavery movement, but also as it morphed and we went into the Civil War, Christmas continued to develop, but so did what the abolitionist women did. And that was in any number of ways. And that was to establish, continue to sew goods like you see here in these gifts that went to soldiers. Harper's Weekly in 1862 published this drawing titled The Influence of Women. And it shows how that had changed through the abolitionist women's societies. They filled many important roles for the war effort, from sewing shirts and knitting socks as part of the Sanitary Commission, to washing clothes for soldiers as camp aides, as well as acting as sisters of charity, ministering to soldiers in the field hospitals, helping to care and heal soldiers. And they became women much more public in the medical field, becoming nurses and treating soldiers. And this is what many of the women I showed you at the beginning continued the efforts after the abolitionism actually happened and moved into other areas such as suffragettes, temperance, women's rights, and so on. So I wanted to just summarize here that the female abolitionists had a great role in promoting the development of Christmas, which includes the Christmas tree and gift giving and Santa Claus and the like. And with that, I hope I gave you an overview of how the female abolitionist roles developed, how they changed society, our thoughts about Christmas, but also, and very as much and as equally important, the role of Christmas today, but also the role of women in society. And with that, we see the Christmas of today, and I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas and take any questions that you might have.